This is my comfort. This is my comfort prop. And I'm about to get my comfort slide, which is, there we are. Okay. All right, all you sorry. Yes, there we are. I'm here to give you folks a lot of good news. And that great news is that there are a whole bunch of simple inventions still waiting to get done. And I'm sure all of you are somehow inventors in your daily lives, and you say, well, I don't have a great lab at Caltech and no big budget. I'm telling you, you can do it in a metal building with a few leaks in the roof and some tools that people drop by, because that's how I do it. It's not as glamorous as the other way, and you have to kind of get into it with a different attitude. And so I'm going to give you the full belly project list of ideas, no rules here, ideas on tin shed inventing. Idea number one is let vague planning pay off big time. About 30 years ago, I was living in Canada and I was running a warehouse, and a little dapper French-Canadian gentleman comes in and stares at my ceiling in my shop. It was an old factory with a high ceiling. Stares for a while, and he says, I want to rent the air above your shop floor. He says, me and my friends in Montreal, we're rethinking the circus. No animals. I'm in charge of the high wire and trapeze stuff. I want a noisy rehearsal space so that my performers get used to a noisy environment. And it didn't take very long before no one on the shop floor noticed that rolling back and forth over the loading dock area and where we charged the forklift was this gentleman on the unicycle. And of course, years later, all of you folks, know them as Cirque du Soleil. Cut to my same friend Lenny, who I run into years later, and he has a great idea. It's going to be a show with Arabian horses, and it's wonderful. But oh my gosh, the animal rights people, what can he do? I said, Lenny, I got a great idea for you. What about? I've just come back from West Africa, and I saw these heavy cargo wagons. They were just laden down, and poor white horses dragging them through the streets, and they're just hooked up with these hard wooden ox yokes. And the front of these horses were bleeding and scarred, and it was horrible to see. I said, Lanny, if you make it your very personal and also public mission to do something about that, I bet the animal rights people will give you a break. And that was my first interest in thinking about ox yokes and horse harnesses. Cut to a nice little neighborhood policeman, our shop here in Wilmington. Every once in a while, he's walking the beat, sticks his head in, and at one point, he finds himself in Little Rock, Arkansas. He's driving around, he's lost, and he finds himself in the parking lot of Heifer International. And from that came a conversation between Heifer International and the Full Belly Project about their engineering wish list. Now, I had wanted for a long time to have this conversation, but if I had done the best planning in the world, I would never have come up with a plan that involved acrobats and lost policemen. Idea number two, no invention is ever final. And I bring this up because one of the first things that Heifer said to me was, we really, really need a better ox yoke. And I guess a lot of us assume that airplanes and cell phones are works in progress, but we kind of assume that the ox yoke, after 2,000 years of more than 2,000 years on 3 continents, that ox technology is it's arrived. So let me show you, lo and behold, the amazing progress that mankind has made in ox technology. Which brings us to rule number 3. I got to use this stick, don't I? Okay. Just because it's obvious doesn't mean it's been done. Some years ago, we were invited to go to more of the western part of the state of North Carolina to help farmers with a livestock watering situation. And they wanted a sustainable energy water pump to get water up to livestock troughs, and we came up with this. It's the most obvious and simple machine you could ever imagine. It's a water-powered seesaw. pivots here, water comes in and it always pours onto the high side, which then gets heavy and drops down and drains, and the other side drops down and drains. 6 times a second, back and forth. There's a piston here, pumps the water, water goes uphill. Because a fair amount of North Carolina taxpayer money had gotten involved with this, we decided that we were going to try and patent it so we could keep the manufacturing here in the state. We went to our good friends up at Fordham University Law School in Manhattan who had done our last patent, and they said, you know, we don't think we can do this. They said, it is such an obvious idea. This, I mean, for heaven's sake, it's a water-powered seesaw. Surely the ancient Egyptians, Romans, Greeks, the ancient Britons, some guy in New England in 1820 has invented a water-powered seesaw. And I said, well, you know, you got to show me. So their students did the patent record search and they went through books on ancient hydrology. And they came to kind of an interesting conclusion that probably the first time that a water-powered seesaw existed on this planet was at the corner of 11th and Chestnut Street in Wilmington, North Carolina in 2009. Idea number 4, fail early, fail often, fail better. Saturday mornings, our doors open, volunteers come in, and maybe a team of them gets together and they're going to try a mechanical concept. And they put it together and they try it and it doesn't work. And then you see a picture that is repeated many times, which this happens a lot. And then we throw it away and we go for Mexican food and we talk about, you know, how to do it better next time. Why this is such an incredibly efficient way to move forward is, of course, failure makes you smarter, but we designed the failure to happen in 4 hours rather than 4 months or perhaps 4 years. A starving sculptor will teach you more than a well-fed engineer. And engineers go to great schools and they learn to use the right materials for the right things. They learn that concrete is for sidewalks and buildings and, you know, and bridges and, but a sculptor knows none of that. A sculptor thinks you can use anything for anything. So when a sculptor thinks concrete, he thinks he can make a bird out of concrete, he can make a flower out of concrete. And if you think like a sculptor, you can say, you know, what's easier for making a precision machine to process food, pour some liquid concrete, or to pour a molten pot of steel. Hence our all too famous universal nutsheller. Sometimes we just get requests. We get a call and someone says, you know, here in the Philippines, we're on the front line of climate change. Every year the typhoons come through and they're bigger and they're more frequent. And when they come through the shantytown, the people go into the, they take refuge in the school, which is probably the only building that has any real substance. And because their shanties are gone, they will be sleeping in that school for 6 or 8 weeks, but you still have to have school during the daytime. So the question was, can you have a series, can you have furniture, which in the daytime is desks, and in 5 minutes, turn it to beds, and then the next morning, 5 minutes, turn it to desks, and that afternoon, turn it back to beds again. So we're not really furniture people, so we got involved with the Herman Miller people, and I went up to Holland, Michigan, and now we're talking about a container, which is kind of like a Lego school interior, that will be able to turn the Lego pieces into desks and beds and blackboards and bookcases and all that stuff. Never underestimate the value of a pain in the ass kid. This is a really important principle. I have a friend here in town who's in the international cotton market, and he says the only way that poor farmers in Africa can play in the world commodities market is with organic cotton. But he says don't do it. They can't do it by selling to the big cotton cartels because the cotton gets kind of mangled in these horrible cotton gins. You've got to rethink the cotton gin. In order to get a long strand cotton, which is worth a lot more, you've got to pull the strands off the cotton, and you've got to do it at the village, and that way they'll get 5 or 6 times more than what they're getting now. So we approached this the way we approach a lot of these things at the shop, which is I send the old guys out into the shop to sweep up and kind of, sort out the drill bits, and I put the kids in the office to go on YouTube. Because YouTube won't actually solve all your problems, but what it'll do is give you some sort of intriguing hints. And the hint here was a home pasta maker. The idea that the smooth rollers that you make your lasagna on, would pull the fibers off, it didn't really work, maybe a bit of cloth, it sort of worked, but there were problems. All the while there's this kid named Don, this pain in the ass kid named Don was saying, Mr. Brandis, what about this part of the pasta maker we threw away, the spaghetti part with the serrated rollers? And I said, Don, it'll never work. And don't take any cotton because you'll just waste it. So fortunately, he stole a little bit of cotton and went over to the next table. And I think that within a few minutes, this is the first time that I have seen cotton balls perfectly ginned by two metal rollers and nothing else. So don't ever underestimate the value of a pain in the ass kid, because every organization like ours has the self-styled genius, right? The guy who, and he's really not that smart unless he's got a bunch of young people around, because invention is still largely a process of accidents. And the self-styled genius can never, ever come up with as many accidents as 6 very poorly supervised high school kids. But you've come here to be part of the process, the many thousand-year process of reinventing the ox yoke. And in a large part of the world, oxen are basically the John Deere tractor for farmers. In a John Deere tractor, we all know enough about, there's a hitch at the back right behind the axle. That's a perfect hitching point for a tractor. So the question is, what would be the perfect hitching point on an ox? A fast glance would suggest that maybe a noose around the neck might just not be the best way for this ox to do work. So I'm going to give you a little experiment you could do at home, and that is if you have a large dog who really might not be that well disciplined and loves to take walks. And our nice dog is called Rumpole. And here we have Rumpole, and I can control him really easily because his pulling point is at the back of his neck. And he knows that he'd love to go, but if he doesn't like a lot of pain and he wants to breathe, he figures out quickly he's going to put out half power, and that's all he's going to do. Now here is Rumpole if I improve his harness a bit. He can tow me around the neighborhood all day long and never get out of breath. And you notice what we've done? We've moved the hitching point from here to back here behind the front axle of a dog. For engineering terms, dogs have front axles. But okay, now we're going to go to the rodeo. You say rodeo and I say rodeo. No, it doesn't work. Okay, in another second, the noose is going to be around the neck of this very large bull. And a moment after that, the cowboy is going to take his end of the rope and he's going to wrap it around the hitching point, the ball hitch of a horse. And the ball hitch of a horse is, of course, the saddle horn. And as soon as he does that, the much larger and stronger bull will be easily controlled by the lighter and weaker horse, because the rope connects to the bull from his worst pulling point and back to the horse at his best pulling point. And do you notice the coincidence that the pulling point on the horse is exactly where the pulling point was on my dog when he could pull so hard, just ahead, just above the rear axle? So here we are in Africa, as you can see. And you can see that this ox is doing his work because he's hooked on his worst pulling point. And I'm getting off the plane. Now, I'm getting back to my original point about good planning and bad planning. If I'd done classic good planning, I would have had someone from the university pick me up from the airplane, and then we would have gone to the NGO, and the next morning we would have seen the guy from UN, and then we would be singing in air conditioned at USAID. We would spend a week talking about the problem, and maybe or maybe not doing anything about it. But instead, my bad planning is going to start to pay off right here. I'm wandering around in a village and I see an ox and a cart, but he's in a hurry, and I'm looking for some materials, and I see a pile of tires, and I say, gee, I wonder if I could make an ox harness out of tires. And I say, probably not. But should I do it anyways? Of course, because, you know, fail early, fail often. I'll be smarter. But the real trick here is how you fail. It's much better to fail in a very public way. If I get some tires, and I get an ox, and I go to the middle of the village square, and if you imagine a big guy with strips of rubber dangling over the back of an ox, you think he's going to collect a crowd in a small African village? Everyone's going to be there. It's not going to be long before the guys in the village push the kids away, and there's this whole thing, and before, somewhere in that village, there is the answer. It was nowhere in the office at the USAID guy, but it's in that village, and bad planning will lead it to you, or you will lead it to it. Hence, let's change our previous motto to fail early, fail often, fail better, and fail in a very, very public way. The last thing, in conclusion, because my enemy, the clock, is counting down. At the Full Belly Project, we have only one rule, and that is no sticky notes. As the guy who does machinery for made of concrete, I get invited to design schools, and I go in there, and there's this whole protocol of you have sticky notes, and you get these are 3 priorities, and each team has 2, and they write them, and the notes move around, and by the time it's done over, the position of the sticky notes has solved your problem. Well, in the Full Belly Project, we have a rule about sticky notes, which is that they're good for one thing and one thing only, and that is to remind us that the bathroom is out of toilet paper. Thank you very much.